Hey guys, Youngblood with you, and it's been a little bit since the actual Q&A came out about the Anvil arrow, but with that in mind, I wanted to still go ahead and cover it to give you a little bit more information regarding the ship, since it's in the game and it's still relevant information, even though by this point you might have gotten it from somewhere else. So one of the first questions that came up was about stealth, because when you looked across the RSI site, different places had different ways of actually describing and categorizing the ship, and one of them on the actual store page mentioned it as a stealth/fighter. So with that in mind, it was actually an error on the page. It really should have only been indicated as a light fighter, and now it actually is adjusted to just reflect that. That being said, just like about any other ship in the game, you can still put stealth components on it, you can still lower your power, you can turn off your weapons, you can do things that will allow you to run a stealthier signature. And with a small cross-section on this ship, it should be relatively easy for you to have a pretty stealth ship if you decide to outfit the components the right way. The commercial went about and said that it's actually one of the fastest and most agile ships in the game. That's not the case. So what does that actually mean? When this Q&A first came out, there were some IFCS issues with the ship that made it kind of a little bit more sluggish. Sometimes when you get closer to the ground and atmosphere, it would almost pull you closer to the planet. That was one of the issues that were in place. Another spot was that, and this was actually in one of their other answers, but it certainly applies here, is that they went on to say that it's a little bit of creative Anvil commercial, selling it as a real manufacturer would do in the game. So for example, if you buy a Ford pickup truck, it's always going to say that it has the greatest torque and hauling capacity of any of them, even though they're probably all about the same, and there's different things like that. So it's kind of just claims. Now, I really don't like that approach when it comes to all of this, just because, yes, it makes sense to worry about a ship in the verse and a company that's kind of selling you on something. But at the end of the day, it's really CIG that's trying to sell us on something. So I think most of the statements should be real or factual. And if it's intended to be part of a sales pitch from a manufacturer in the game in lore, then it probably needs to be called out, even in like a postscript. But I think that should be something that would have been addressed earlier. Now, there's going to be a lot of comparisons to other light fighters, and one of them was about the Arrow versus the Gladius. It's kind of looking at the Anvil versus the Aegis competitor. And all in all, what it comes down to is that the Arrow is more agile, but it's going to be a little bit slower than the Gladius. So there you go. It's not it's not the fastest in the class, but it is more agile than the Gladius, and that means it is pretty agile. And the way it flies now, you can really tell that it does handle well. As far as hard points, they have about the same hard points. The Gladius comes with more missiles. It also has better dependability and acceleration because it comes with dual engines. Although the Arrow does end up being cheaper to start, and it comes with a turret mount, which is because that's a cheaper way to allow you to buy the ship. And you can always upgrade to a larger weapon and replace the turret with a size 3, which gives you a pretty good bang for your buck, especially if you're buying the weapon with UEC, or if you're buying it or pulling it off of another one of your ships. One of the questions did ask if there was going to be a store-all box to allow you to really carry cargo instead of a turret, and right now they said that is not in the plans. Now, when you look at another comparison in the Anvil line, so Arrow versus Hawk, what's the difference in the fighters there? And it comes down to the Hawk is supposed to be faster to allow it to actually rush out and catch bounties, but it's not going to be as maneuverable. As far as the hard points, the Arrow has far better hard points, bringing in size 3s, giving you a larger DPS possibility of throwing more damage downrange. The classic question from every single one of these Q&As, what will this fit in? It is a carrier-based fighter, so all things that are considered a carrier, like the Idris, the Kraken, and the Bengal. You also have the Javelin, the Endeavor Hangar, the 890 Jump, and the Polaris should all be able to fit the Hawk as well. The long story short here is if it fits, it sits, just like all other ships, but those are the ones that were specifically called out to be able to fit this. The Carrack was said not to be able to fit it, primarily based on the ceiling height and the way the wings kind of fold up on the Hawk. I'm sorry, on the Arrow. When they asked, was this built for the new flight model? It kind of seems like it was, with the way that it was actually being a little bit drifty, and you watch the commercials and the way it almost can kind of spin around and maintain some of its original momentum. That being said, it was built on the original flight model, and it's going to be adjusted along with all the other ships once we get to that point. One question came up asking about interior space. We know there's really just a cockpit there, so they asked if there was a spot for personal weapons or armor or survival supplies, and they said, well, eventually they want to allow all ships to be able to store at least a weapon. That's not there today. When asking about how they're going to balance, and this is probably the most relevant question out of all of this, how are you going to balance the current 9 light fighters that are in the game? Because obviously they're all going to have different approaches, and they have different price points, and they're going to perform in different ways. That being said, when you look at all of them, the Arrow, along with the Gladius, the Delta, and the Blade, are all really in the dedicated fighters category because they don't really carry cargo, so you're really only using it for that purpose. Now, that takes on different approaches, like more attack versus more interceptor versus more actual like fighter. You look at those and you say, okay, well, the Gladius is the more of the missile boat out of all of those. The Arrow is kind of in the interceptor or interdiction category. The Delta is the one that kind of punches above its weight class when you start talking about the rocket pods and larger ships. The Blade is probably the most agile out of all of those. So there's different characteristics in loadout. That means that it's hard to compare them, apples to apples. But those are the ones that you would probably lump in and compare. You look at other ones like the Aurora LN and the 125A. Those are both going to be able to carry cargo. The Hawk carries a prisoner and also brings along an EMP. The Kar-2 is really more of a scout. They're all just very different. So while there's a lot of ships that fit that genre of light fighter, you almost need to break them down into subcategories to really do your better comparisons. When asked about the maneuvering thrusters, it was listed as joint thrusters, and people were wondering what that is. A joint thruster is a subset of a gimbaled maneuvering thruster, with the other two being roll or flex. And it sounds like there's maybe even more than that in the game. Joint just means that they can change their orientation in a 90-degree arc. Flex thrusters can move 180 degrees in an arc, and roll thrusters, like on the Hornet, have a pitch and yaw of 90 degrees, but they probably don't have the third axis. So I'm going to need to do a little bit more research on this, and specifically how they impact flight, because I'm not really sure how to break that down any further without doing testing. So that'll probably be a follow-up video at some point soon. One of the questions that I don't really know why was a question, it asked what type of components can the Arrow equip? They called out military, stealth, or civilian. I don't know why you wouldn't be able to equip industry on that, or industrial. But all of the ships, at least today, allow you to equip any of the class of component. So it's whatever you want to do to your ship, you can. And there's positives and drawbacks for whatever you decide to do. You put on military, and it's going to be a hot and loud. Competitive type components are going to be hot and loud. Stealth is going to be less powerful, but a little lower signature. So there shouldn't be any restrictions. They didn't call out competition or industrial, but I would assume those are things that we're going to be able to see, but we'll just have to wait and see on that. You are going to be able to use an AI blade to automate the top turret. It's not in place today, obviously, but with this being a small ship, short-range, light fighter, you're not going to have a whole lot of computing power on this ship. So it is going to use about half of your blade space if you decide to do that. With how agile this ship is, I would say that you are much better off utilizing all 3 hard points and making them all size 3s. And the last question that was brought up was, it currently has very low fuel capacity. Is that intended? And the answer was yes. It's a short-range carrier fighter, thus it's going to need to refuel fairly frequently. And, you start talking about balancing all of these light fighters, some of which cost more than this, some of them cost less, but I think it's just a balancing point to say, okay, this thing costs a little bit more. It brings a lot of weapons to the fight. It maneuvers really well, but maybe you're going to be a little bit more limited in range than some of the others. So that's your Q&A and kind of updated information. I think it all makes a lot of sense outside of a couple of the takeaways I had there. I still really like the ship. The cockpit experience is good. It flies well. It's got a lot of good firepower, and everybody that I've talked to that's used it seems to really like it. So good information to have. If you guys have any questions on this, please let me know. Stay tuned. I'm going to have a Hawk video coming out soon. Otherwise, questions, let me know. Have yourselves a wonderful day. Take care.